I was standing in my son David's hallway, just outside the kitchen door, holding a fresh peach cobbler I'd spent all morning making, when I heard my granddaughter Emma's voice cut through the air like a knife through my heart. She asked me the same question 3 times yesterday, Emma said, and then came the laughter. That cruel, mocking laughter that still echoes in my mind even now. She's definitely losing it. This is going to be easier than we thought. My hand trembled so badly the dish nearly slipped from my grip. I stood there frozen, listening to my 3 grandchildren, Jake, Emma, and Tyler, the babies I'd rocked to sleep and read bedtime stories to, rehearsing what they'd tell a judge about my supposed incompetence, laughing about how confused their senile grandma was becoming. You need to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story. I never imagined, not in 76 years of living, that the children I'd loved with my whole heart would look at me and see nothing but an obstacle between them and money. But that's exactly what happened. Standing in that hallway with a peach cobbler growing cold in my hands while my world shattered around me. My name is Margaret Thompson, and I'm 76 years old. I've been a widow for 5 years now, since my beloved Henry passed from a sudden heart attack that took him from me before I could say goodbye. We'd built a good life together. He was a commercial real estate developer, and I'd worked alongside him for 40 years, keeping the books, managing properties, making decisions together. When he died, he left me everything. Our beautiful beach house in Cape May, the investment properties we'd acquired over the decades, savings and investments that had grown to over $2 million. It was more money than I'd ever expected to have, more than enough to live comfortably for whatever years I had left. But apparently it wasn't enough for my family to wait for. Let me take you back a bit so you understand how I ended up in that hallway, eavesdropping on my own grandchildren plotting against me. After Henry died, I went through that terrible fog of grief that comes with losing your partner of 52 years. The house felt enormous and empty without him. I'd reach for him in the night, forgetting for just a moment that he was gone, and the remembering would break my heart all over again. My son David and my daughter Carol were attentive those first few months, calling regularly, visiting often, making sure I was eating and taking care of myself. I thought they were being good children. I thought their concern was genuine. And maybe it was at first. Maybe the greed came later, creeping in slowly like water damage you don't notice until the ceiling caves in. The grandchildren started visiting more often too. Jake was 35, working in sales but always complaining about money being tight. Emma was 28, fresh out of graduate school with massive student loans she resented paying. Tyler was 32, between jobs more often than not, always with some new business idea that just needed funding to take off. They'd come by individually or in pairs, always friendly, always asking how I was doing, always so very interested in my well-being. I should have seen it then. Should have noticed the pattern. But grief makes you grateful for any sign of love, any indication that you're not completely alone in the world. So I welcomed their visits, baked them cookies, listened to their problems, offered advice they never took. It was about 8 months after Henry's death when I first noticed the subtle shift. Little comments that seemed innocent at the time, but looking back now, I can see them for what they were. The beginning of a carefully constructed plan. Emma started asking me questions about my routine, about my daily schedule, about whether I was managing okay living alone in such a big house. "Grandma, are you sure you're remembering to take your medications?" she'd ask, even though I'd been managing my own pills for decades without issue. "Are you eating properly? You seem a little forgetful lately." Forgetful. That word started appearing more and more in conversations. Jake would visit and tell me stories about things we'd supposedly discussed during his last visit, conversations that had never happened. When I'd politely tell him I didn't recall that conversation, he'd get this concerned look on his face and pat my hand. "That's okay, Grandma. Don't worry about it. Memory gets fuzzy at your age." At your age. As if 76 meant I was somehow already halfway to the grave, incompetent and confused. Tyler was perhaps the most obvious, though I didn't realize it at the time. He'd ask me what day it was or what I'd done yesterday, or whether I'd remembered some appointment I'd never made. When I'd look confused because his questions were confusing, he'd exchange glances with whichever other grandchild happened to be there. Meaningful looks I couldn't quite interpret, but that made my stomach twist with unease. Then came the family group chat incident. That's what I call it now, though at the time it felt like the ground opening up beneath my feet. My friend Dorothy's grandson, who's some kind of computer whiz, had helped me set up messaging on my phone so I could stay in touch with the family more easily. I wasn't great with technology, but I could manage the basics. One Tuesday afternoon, I got a notification that I'd been added to a group chat. I assumed it was the family chat David had mentioned starting, a way for everyone to share updates and stay connected. What I found instead was a conversation that had clearly been going on for weeks. I sat in my kitchen, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows. Henry had installed himself 30 years ago. And I read message after message that made me feel like I was falling through ice into dark water. Emma had written. She wore the same cardigan twice this week. Didn't even notice. Definitely not tracking things anymore. Jake? I told her a story about Uncle Robert's fishing trip yesterday. There is no Uncle Robert. She just nodded along like she remembered. This is going to be so easy. Tyler. Got another video of her looking confused. Once we compile enough evidence, the competency hearing should be a slam dunk. And then perhaps worst of all, my own son David. Good work, kids. Keep documenting everything. That beach house alone is worth $1.2 million. Once we get power of attorney, we can finally start liquidating assets. I sat there for what might have been minutes or hours, reading and rereading those messages, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. These were my grandchildren. My babies. The children I'd babysat countless times while their parents worked, whose school plays I'd attended, whose college tuitions I'd helped with. And they were deliberately gaslighting me, creating false evidence of incompetence, planning to have me declared unfit so they could take control of everything Henry and I had worked for. The messages went back weeks. They'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months, and I'd had no idea. I should tell you something important here. I was not losing my mind. I was not confused or forgetful beyond what's normal for anyone at any age. I was sharp, engaged, still managing my own finances and properties, still volunteering at the library twice a week, still reading the Wall Street Journal every morning with my coffee. Yes, I occasionally misplaced my reading glasses. Yes, I sometimes walked into a room and forgot what I'd come for. But these are things that happen to 30-year-olds and 76-year-olds alike. But my family had decided I was incompetent. Not because I was, but because it was convenient for them. Because they wanted my money and didn't want to wait for me to die to get it. That realization, understanding that my own children and grandchildren valued my estate more than my life, it did something to me. Changed something fundamental in how I saw the world and my place in it. I sat there in my kitchen until the sun set, until the room grew dark around me, and I made a decision. If they wanted to play games with me, to manipulate me, to try to steal my competence and my autonomy, then I would play too. But I would play to win. The next morning I called my lawyer, Richard Morrison, who'd handled our estate planning for decades. Richard was 70 himself, sharp as ever, and when I explained what was happening, his voice got very quiet and very serious. Margaret, what you're describing is elder abuse, he said. Financial exploitation. We need to act fast and we need to be smart about this. He connected me with a private investigator named Sarah Chan, a woman in her 40s who specialized in family fraud cases. Sarah came to my house that very afternoon, dressed casually so the neighbors wouldn't wonder, and she listened to my story with a calm, professional demeanor that made me feel less crazy for the first time since I discovered the group chat. I've seen this before, Sarah said gently. More often than you'd think. Adult children who can't wait for their inheritance. The good news is, you're aware and you're taking action. That puts you way ahead. Now we need to document everything. Over the next few weeks, Sarah taught me how to be sneaky in ways I'd never imagined. She showed me how to use my phone to record conversations without anyone knowing. She helped me set up small cameras around my house, in the living room, the kitchen, places where the grandchildren would talk freely when they thought I'd stepped away. She explained how to screenshot and save every message from that group chat, how to document every interaction. And then I went to see doctors. Not just one, but 3 separate physicians, all of them highly respected in their fields. I had comprehensive cognitive evaluations, memory tests, psychiatric assessments. I wanted ironclad proof that I was of sound mind, proof that couldn't be disputed or explained away. All 3 doctors came to the same conclusion. I was cognitively intact, psychologically sound, and fully competent to manage my own affairs. One of them, Dr. Patricia Williams, even made a comment that stuck with me. "Mrs. Thompson, you're sharper than most of my patients half your age. Whatever your family is claiming about you, it's not supported by any medical evidence." But I didn't tell my family about these evaluations. I didn't tell them about Sarah or the recordings or the evidence I was carefully, methodically gathering. I just continued being myself, continued living my life, and watched as they dug themselves deeper and deeper into a hole they didn't even know existed. The visits continued. The fake concern, the deliberate confusion, the recording of my supposed forgetfulness. They staged elaborate scenarios designed to catch me making mistakes. Emma called one evening to ask if I remembered the story about the time Grandpa Henry got lost on vacation. A story that had never happened. When I politely said I didn't recall that, I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "That's okay, Grandma. Don't worry about it." Jake brought over old photo albums and pointed to pictures, asking me who people were. When I correctly identified everyone, he'd shake his head sadly and say I'd gotten several names wrong. I hadn't, but there was no point arguing. I was being gaslit by my own grandson, and he thought I was too confused to notice. Tyler was perhaps the most aggressive. He started asking me to sign things, innocuous things at first, like birthday cards for family members, a petition for some local cause. I always read carefully before signing anything, something Henry had drilled into me over decades of business dealings. Tyler would get frustrated when I'd take time to read what he'd put in front of me. "Grandma, you don't trust me?" he'd ask, heard in his voice that might have convinced me if I didn't know better. I refused to sign anything without my lawyer reviewing it first. That seemed to alarm them, though they tried to hide it. Then came that Sunday dinner. 6 months after I'd first discovered the group chat. David had invited the whole family over. His wife Patricia, Carol and her husband Tom, and all 3 grandchildren. It was supposed to be a nice family gathering, a chance to reconnect, to share a meal together. I spent all morning making that peach cobbler, using Henry's mother's recipe, the one the grandchildren had always loved. I arrived right on time, dish in hand, and I could hear voices from the kitchen as I approached down the hallway. Something made me pause, made me stop and listen instead of announcing my arrival. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the paranoia that months of being gaslit had created in me. Maybe it was just luck. But I stopped and I listened, and I heard the truth laid bare in my granddaughter's mocking voice. She asked me the same question 3 times yesterday, Emma was saying, and there was laughter. Not kind laughter. Not the gentle amusement of people genuinely concerned about an aging relative. This was cruel, sharp laughter that made my blood run cold. "She's definitely losing it. This is going to be easier than we thought. Did you get it on video?" That was Jake's voice. "Of course. Tyler got her yesterday too, right? That thing with pretending we'd had a conversation about Uncle Robert." "Yeah, she totally believed it. Nodded along like she remembered. The lawyer says we almost have enough evidence for the competency hearing. How long until we can file?" "Tyler this time. Dad's lawyer says maybe another month. We want to be sure we have an airtight case." My son's voice. My own son, discussing having his mother declared incompetent like it was a business transaction. "And then what?" Emma asked. "Then we get power of attorney," David said. "Once we control her assets, we can start selling things off. The beach house first, that'll bring in over $1 million easy. The investment properties are bringing in rental income, but they'd be worth more if we sold them. And the liquid assets, we can invest those properly instead of letting them sit in conservative funds like Mom has them." "What about Grandma?" Jake asked. "Where does she go?" There was a pause, and then Carol's voice, my daughter's voice. "There are facilities. Nice ones. Once we have control of her finances, we can afford somewhere that'll take good care of her. She'll be safe, supervised, and we'll have access to the assets she's been sitting on." Sitting on. As if the money Henry and I had earned through decades of hard work was somehow being wasted by my continued existence. The peach cobbler dish was slipping in my hands. I could feel tears burning in my eyes, my heart hammering so hard I thought they might hear it through the wall. "I still can't believe how easy this has been," Tyler said. "I mean, she really thinks we care about her." More laughter. That terrible, casual laughter, as if my pain and humiliation were nothing more than entertainment. I stood there for another moment, listening to them plan my future, my institutionalization, the liquidation of everything Henry and I had built. And then I turned around, walked back down that hallway, got into my car and drove home. I left that peach cobbler on the hall table where they'd find it eventually, proof that I'd been there, that I'd heard. I wanted them to know. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that I'd been recording everything. That their entire conversation was documented, saved, backed up in multiple locations. That they just handed me exactly what I needed to destroy them. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't sleep. I lay in the bed I'd shared with Henry for 52 years, staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly in the darkness, and I felt something inside me breaking that had nothing to do with my heart and everything to do with my spirit. You see, there's a special kind of pain that comes from discovering the people you love most in the world see you as nothing more than an inconvenience standing between them and money. It's not like grief, which has its own terrible rhythm. It's more like discovering that everything you thought was real was actually a performance, and you were the only one who didn't know you were watching a play. The tears came around 3 in the morning, hot and angry and so full of hurt I thought I might drown in them. I cried for the grandmother I'd thought I was, the beloved matriarch, the keeper of family stories, the one they came to for advice and comfort. I cried for the illusion I'd been living in, thinking their visits and calls were motivated by love when all along they were just surveillance, gathering evidence, building a case against my competence. And I cried for Henry, who'd worked so hard to build something to leave our children, never imagining they'd be so eager to take it that they couldn't wait for me to die naturally. But somewhere around dawn, when the sky started lightening outside my window and the birds began their morning songs, something shifted in me. The tears dried up, and in their place came something cold and clear and absolutely certain. I was done crying, done being hurt. If my family wanted to treat me like an enemy, like an obstacle to be removed, then I would act accordingly. I would protect myself with every tool at my disposal, and I would make absolutely certain they never had the chance to hurt me like this again. I got up, made myself coffee the way Henry always had, strong and black with just a touch of cream, and I called Sarah Chun before the sun had fully risen. She answered on the second ring, her voice alert despite the early hour, and when I told her what I'd overheard at David's house, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Margaret, I need you to tell me you recorded that conversation," Sarah said finally. "I did," I told her. "Every word. I had my phone in my pocket, recording app running just like you taught me." "Good. That's very good. We need to meet today. Can you come to my office?" We met that afternoon in Sarah's small office downtown, and I played her the recording. She listened with her eyes closed, her face getting harder and more set with each cruel word, each mocking laugh. When it finished, she opened her eyes and looked at me with something that might have been pity mixed with anger. "I've been doing this work for 15 years, Sarah said quietly, "and it never stops shocking me how people can treat their own family members. Margaret, what they're planning, it's textbook elder abuse. Financial exploitation with intent to commit fraud. And the gaslighting, the deliberate confusion tactics, that's psychological abuse. This is serious. I knew it was serious. I'd lived it for months. But hearing someone else name it, put those labels on what my family was doing to me, somehow made it more real. More terrible. What do we do now?" I asked. Sarah pulled out a folder she'd been compiling, and she showed me everything we'd gathered so far. Recordings of the grandchildren deliberately trying to confuse me. Screenshots of the group chat messages where they discussed their plans. Videos from the cameras in my house showing them staging scenarios, then exchanging satisfied looks when I reacted with natural confusion. Documentation from 3 separate doctors confirming my complete mental competence. Bank records showing that my finances were meticulously managed, every bill paid on time, every investment carefully tracked. "We have everything we need," Sarah said. "But here's the thing, if we wait for them to file for conservatorship and then fight it, even if we win, the damage is done. The accusation alone can be devastating. People will always wonder if maybe there was some truth to it. What I'd recommend is that we be proactive. We file a civil suit for attempted fraud and elder abuse. We go on the offensive." The idea terrified me. It meant making this public, making it real, acknowledging that my family had turned against me in ways that couldn't be fixed or forgiven. But what was the alternative? Wait for them to succeed in having me declared incompetent? Spend whatever years I had left fighting to prove I was capable while they controlled every aspect of my life? "Let's do it," I said. But Sarah held up her hand. There's something else you need to consider. If we do this, you're going to lose them. Not just temporarily, permanently. David, Carol, the grandchildren, they won't forgive you for exposing them like this. You need to be prepared for that. I thought about that for a long moment. About Sunday dinners I'd never attend again, about holidays alone, about grandchildren who would grow up hearing terrible things about me, about dying someday without my children at my bedside. It should have been an impossible choice. Family is supposed to be everything, isn't it? You're supposed to forgive anything, endure anything, sacrifice everything for the people who share your blood. But they'd already made their choice. They'd chosen money over me. They'd chosen cruelty over compassion. They'd looked at their mother and grandmother and decided I was worth more to them as a controlled asset than as a living, breathing person with feelings and autonomy. I've already lost them, I said finally. I lost them the moment they decided to do this. I'm just making it official. Sarah nodded slowly. Okay then. We move forward. But Margaret, I want you to do something else for me. I want you to change your will. Right now. Today. Because if something happens to you before this case is resolved, I don't want them getting a single dollar of what you and Henry built. She was right, of course. So that very afternoon, I went to see Richard Morrison, and we sat in his comfortable office with its leather chairs and old law books lining the walls, and we completely rewrote my will. Everything, the beach house, the investment properties, the savings and investments, every single dollar, would go to the Elder Rights Foundation, a charity that fought against financial abuse of seniors. David and Carol would each receive $1. Symbolic recognition that they were my children and nothing more. The grandchildren would receive nothing, not even that symbolic dollar. And with the will, I wrote letters to each of them, letters that would be delivered when I died, explaining exactly why they'd been cut out. Richard made sure the will was ironclad, that it couldn't be contested on grounds of incompetence. We had the 3 doctors' evaluations attached. We had character witnesses lined up. We had everything documented to prove that I was of sound mind when I made these decisions, that I understood exactly what I was doing and why. When it was done, when I'd signed every page and Richard had filed everything away in his safe, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. Whatever happened now, they couldn't win. Even if they succeeded somehow in having me declared incompetent before the case went to trial, even if something happened to me, they wouldn't get what they wanted. The money would go to helping other seniors fight exactly the kind of abuse they'd inflicted on me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. There's so much that happened between that day and the eventual resolution, so much that needs to be told. The next few weeks were strange and disorienting. My family didn't know I'd been at David's house that Sunday. Didn't know I'd overheard their planning session. They found the peach cobbler on the hall table, and David called me that evening, his voice full of false concern. Mom, you left your dish here. We were wondering where you went. Are you feeling okay? We were worried about you. I kept my voice calm, neutral. I wasn't feeling well, so I left. I'm fine now. Don't worry about the dish. I'll pick it up another time. There was a pause, and I could almost hear him calculating, wondering if I'd heard anything, trying to decide if I suspected. Well, we missed you at dinner. The family was asking about you. The family. The same family that had been in that kitchen mocking me, planning my institutionalization. I'm sure they were, I said. I need to go, David. I have something on the stove. I didn't have anything on the stove. I was sitting in my dark living room with a glass of wine I wasn't drinking, feeling the weight of everything I knew pressing down on me like a physical force. The visits continued, but they felt different now. I knew what I was watching, a performance, a carefully staged show designed to document my supposed incompetence. When Emma came by to ask me confusing questions, I answered calmly and then watched her face fall when I didn't take the bait. When Jake tried to trick me with stories about events that had never happened, I simply smiled and told him my memory of things was different. They were getting frustrated, I could tell. Their timeline was slipping. They needed me to appear more confused, more uncertain, and I was refusing to cooperate. Tyler was the most persistent. He started showing up unannounced, always with his phone out, always trying to catch me in moments of supposed confusion. One afternoon he arrived to find me working in my garden, something I'd done for 40 years, and he acted surprised that I knew the names of all my plants. Wow, Grandma, I didn't know you still gardened, he said, filming me on his phone. I've always gardened, Tyler. You used to help me plant tomatoes when you were little. Did I? He looked uncertain, like maybe he was the one forgetting things. You did. You were 7 years old and you ate more cherry tomatoes than you planted. Your mother got mad at you for spoiling your dinner. He lowered his phone, frowning. I could see him trying to figure out if this story was real or if I was making it up. The problem with gaslighting someone is that eventually you start questioning your own memories too. But the worst visit came about 3 weeks after the dinner party incident. All 3 grandchildren showed up together, unannounced, and they had someone with them. A man in his 50s wearing a cheap suit and carrying a briefcase. They didn't introduce him right away, just asked if they could come in, if we could all sit down and talk. I knew what this was. This was their preliminary evaluation, the doctor they probably paid to give them the diagnosis they wanted. Sarah had warned me this might happen, had coached me on how to handle it. I let them in. I offered coffee and cookies like the grandmother they thought I was. And then we all sat in my living room, the room where I'd rocked these children as babies, where I'd comforted them through nightmares and celebrated their accomplishments, and they tried to have me declared incompetent. The man introduced himself as Dr. Raymond Kowalski, a neuropsychologist. He started asking me questions, simple things at first. What day was it? Who was the president? Could I count backwards from 100 by sevens? I answered everything correctly, calmly, even as my heart raced with anger and hurt. I watched my grandchildren's faces fall with each correct answer, saw the frustration building in their eyes. Dr. Kowalski tried different tactics. He told me stories and asked me to repeat them. He gave me lists to memorize. He asked about my daily routine, my medications, my ability to manage my finances. And through it all, I remained calm and competent, giving him nothing he could use against me. Finally, after an hour of this charade, Jake interrupted. Dr. Kowalski, this isn't typical of how she usually is. She's having a good day. You should see her on her bad days. I don't have bad days, I said quietly. I'm 76 years old and I'm in excellent health, physically and mentally. Whatever you 3 have told Dr. Kowalski about me isn't true. Emma's face flushed. Grandma, we're just concerned about you. We've noticed you forgetting things, getting confused. We want to make sure you're safe. Safe from what? From living in my own home? From managing the estate my husband left me? From making my own decisions about my own life? I looked at each of them in turn. I know what you're doing. I've known for months. The room went very quiet. Dr. Kowalski looked uncomfortable, like he'd suddenly realized he'd been brought into something he didn't fully understand. What are you talking about? Tyler tried, but his voice was weak. I know about the group chat. I know about your plan to have me declared incompetent. I know about the staged visits, the fake confusion, the lies you've been documenting. I know everything. Emma stood up abruptly. We should go. Yes, I said. You should. And Dr. Kowalski, before you write any report, you should know that I've been evaluated by 3 independent physicians, all of whom have found me completely competent. I've also documented every interaction with my grandchildren, including recordings of them discussing their fraud. If you submit a false report, you'll be implicated in their scheme. Dr. Kowalski went pale. He packed up his briefcase quickly and left without another word. The grandchildren followed, no longer bothering with false concern or loving goodbyes. The masks had finally come off. After they left, I sat in that living room for a long time, shaking with reaction. It was done. The confrontation I'd been dreading had happened, and I'd survived it. But more than that, I'd won it. I'd stood my ground, shown them I wasn't the confused old woman they tried to make me into. That night Sarah called me. They know, she said without preamble. They know you're aware of the plan. That changes things. They're going to move faster now, try to file before we can stop them. We need to be ready. I'm ready, I told her. And I was. Whatever came next, whatever consequences followed from standing up for myself, I was ready to face them. Because the alternative, letting them succeed, losing my autonomy, spending whatever years I had left trapped in some facility while they spent the money Henry and I had earned, that was worse than anything. Worse than being alone. Worse than losing my family. I'd rather be alone and free than surrounded by people who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to overcome. The paperwork arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a process server who looked apologetic as he handed me the envelope. I signed for it calmly, thanked him, and closed the door before my hands started shaking. This was it. This was the moment I'd been preparing for but still dreaded. My own family had filed a petition to have me declared incompetent and placed under conservatorship, with David named as my proposed conservator. I sat at my kitchen table and read through the petition, and every word felt like another small betrayal. They'd compiled a list of supposed incidents demonstrating my declining mental state. According to their filing, I repeatedly forgot conversations, couldn't remember family members' names, left the stove on multiple times, got lost driving to familiar places, and showed signs of severe memory loss and confusion. Every single claim was a lie, manufactured evidence from their months-long gaslighting campaign. But what hurt most was the language they used. They described me as a danger to myself, unable to manage basic daily activities, a vulnerable adult in need of protection. They'd taken the woman who'd raised them, who'd managed a successful real estate business alongside their father for 40 years, who still balanced her checkbook to the penny and never missed a doctor's appointment, and they'd painted her as helpless and confused. They'd turned me into someone I didn't recognize, someone who existed only on paper as justification for taking everything I had. I called Richard immediately, and he told me not to worry, that we'd been preparing for exactly this. Sarah had already compiled our counter-evidence, the 3 independent medical evaluations, the recordings of their planning sessions, the documentation of their fraud. We had everything we needed to destroy their case and expose them for what they were attempting to do. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. 6 weeks of living with the knowledge that my children and grandchildren had gone through with it, had actually filed legal documents accusing me of incompetence, had chosen to publicly humiliate me rather than simply wait for me to die naturally. 6 weeks of wondering what people in town thought when they heard about the case, if they believed the lies, if they looked at me with pity now instead of respect. David called me the day after I was served. His voice was cold, businesslike, so different from the son I'd raised. "Mom, we need to talk about this situation. The lawyers and the judge don't need to be involved. If you just agree to let me help manage things, we can withdraw the petition. Make this easier on everyone. Make it easier on everyone. Code 4. Let us take control without a fight and we'll pretend this never happened." "No," I said simply. "Mom, be reasonable. We're doing this for your own good. You're not capable of managing everything alone anymore. Dad wouldn't have wanted you struggling like this." The mention of Henry, the invocation of his name to justify what they were doing, that made something snap inside me. "Don't you dare," I said, my voice shaking with anger I could no longer contain. "Don't you dare use your father to justify this. Henry would be ashamed of all of you. He worked his entire life to build something for this family, and you can't even wait for me to die before you try to take it. That's not what this is about." "Yes, it is. It's exactly what this is about. I heard you, David. I heard all of you at the dinner party, planning this, laughing about how confused I was, talking about selling the beach house and liquidating assets. I know everything." Silence on the other end of the line. Then, "If you fight this, you're going to lose. We have documentation. We have witnesses. You're going to end up in a facility anyway, but you'll have destroyed your relationship with your family in the process." "I've already lost my family," I said quietly. "You made sure of that when you decided I was worth more to you as a controlled asset than as your mother. I'll see you in court, David." I hung up before he could respond, and I sat there in my kitchen shaking with reaction. It was real now. Undeniably, irreversibly real. My son had threatened me, had told me I would lose, had made it clear that he felt entitled to my assets regardless of what I wanted. The weeks before the hearing were strange and isolating. Carol called once, trying a different tactic than David had used. She cried, told me she loved me, said this was all a misunderstanding and couldn't we work it out as a family? But when I asked her directly if she'd been part of the planning, if she'd participated in the group chat discussions about having me declared incompetent, she went quiet. "We were just concerned," she said finally. "You have to understand, Mom. From our perspective, you were showing signs of decline. We were trying to help. By lying about me, by creating false evidence, by plotting to take control of everything I own. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. I have the recordings, Carol. I have your voice on tape discussing which facility to put me in once you had power of attorney. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this was about concern. She didn't call again after that. The grandchildren didn't contact me at all. I suppose they knew there was nothing they could say, no way to explain or justify what they'd done. Or maybe they simply didn't care enough to try. Either way, the silence from them was absolute. Sarah and Richard prepared our case meticulously. We had Dr. Patricia Williams, Dr. Michael Sung, and Dr. Elizabeth Barrett all prepared to testify about their evaluations of me. We had the recordings of the family planning sessions. We had documentation showing my financial accounts were perfectly managed, every property properly maintained, every obligation met on time. We had character witnesses, my neighbors, my friends from the library where I volunteered, my longtime accountant who could testify that I understood every aspect of my finances. And then we had the smoking gun. The group chat messages, where they'd explicitly discuss fabricating evidence and their real motivations for pursuing conservatorship. "Margaret, I need to prepare you for something," Richard said during one of our planning sessions, about a week before the hearing. "When we present this evidence, when we expose what they've been doing, it's going to be brutal. For them, yes, but also for you. You're going to have to sit there and listen while we play recordings of your family mocking you, planning against you. You're going to have to watch their faces when they realize they've lost. And you need to be ready for the fact that there's no coming back from this. Once we do this, once we publicly expose their fraud, any possibility of reconciliation is gone forever." I thought about that for a long moment. About holiday dinners I'd never attend again. About grandchildren who would grow up hating me. Fed stories about the terrible grandmother who turned against her family. About dying someday with no one at my bedside but paid caregivers, if anyone at all. "I know," I said finally. "But Richard, what's the alternative? Let them win. Let them take control of my life, put me in a facility, spend the money Henry and I earned while I sit in some room watching television and waiting to die? Is that better than being alone?" He shook his head slowly. "No, it's not. I just wanted to make sure you understood the cost." "I understand," I said. "Let's do it." The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully in the navy suit Henry had always liked, the one I'd worn to important business meetings back when we were building our company together. I put on the pearl earrings he'd given me for our 50th anniversary. I did my hair the way he'd loved, swept back in a neat bun that made me look professional and competent. I wanted to look like someone who was in complete control of her faculties, someone who didn't need anyone to manage her life for her. Sarah picked me up at 8:30, and we drove to the courthouse in silence. I could see her glancing at me occasionally, probably wondering if I was going to fall apart, but I felt strangely calm. This was it. This was the moment where the truth would come out, where justice would either be served or denied. There was no point in being nervous anymore. Whatever happened would happen. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, more ordinary. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lighting that made everything look slightly yellow. Rows of benches that reminded me of church pews. David and Carol were already there with their lawyer, a sharp-looking woman in her 40s who exuded confidence. The grandchildren sat behind them, Jake in an ill-fitting suit, Emma in a conservative dress I'd never seen her wear before, Tyler looking uncomfortable and avoiding my eyes. We sat on opposite sides of the room, and the symbolism wasn't lost on me. This was how it would be from now on, me on one side, them on the other, a divide that could never be bridged. Judge Catherine Morrison entered, and we all stood. She was probably 60, with steel gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She'd been on the bench for 20 years, Richard had told me, and she had a reputation for being fair but tough. She didn't suffer fools, and she particularly didn't tolerate people who tried to abuse the conservatorship system. The proceedings began with David's lawyer presenting their case. She was good, I had to admit. She made me sound like a tragedy waiting to happen. A confused elderly woman living alone in a big house, forgetting things, making poor decisions, unable to manage her own affairs. She presented their evidence, the videos of me looking confused, the testimony they'd prepared about my supposed forgetfulness, the carefully constructed narrative of my decline. Jake testified first, describing incidents of me forgetting conversations, getting confused about dates, asking the same questions repeatedly. He sounded so sincere, so concerned, that if I didn't know better, I might have believed him myself. Emma went next, talking about how she'd noticed my memory slipping, How I'd worn the same clothes multiple times without seeming to realize it. How I'd told her stories about people who didn't exist. She even cried a little, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, playing the role of the concerned granddaughter perfectly. Tyler's testimony was similar. More examples of confusion, more incidents of forgetfulness, more evidence of my supposed incompetence. By the time he finished, if you didn't know any better, you'd think I was lucky to even remember my own name. Then it was David's turn. My own son stood up there and testified about his concerns for my safety, about how I couldn't be left alone anymore, about how he was seeking conservatorship not for financial reasons but purely out of love and concern for my well-being. He said it so convincingly that for a moment, I almost wondered if he believed it himself. If he'd somehow convinced himself that this was really about protecting me rather than accessing my assets. Judge Morrison listened to all of it with an impassive expression, taking notes occasionally, asking a few clarifying questions but mostly just absorbing the performance they were putting on. Then it was Richard's turn and everything changed. He started by calling Dr. Patricia Williams to the stand. She was in her 50s, distinguished-looking, with credentials that took several minutes just to read into the record. She testified about the comprehensive cognitive evaluation she performed on me just 3 months earlier, about the tests she'd administered, about the results that showed I was functioning at a level well above average for my age group. In your professional opinion, Dr. Williams, does Margaret Thompson show any signs of cognitive impairment or dementia? Absolutely not. Mrs. Thompson's cognitive function is excellent. Her memory, both short-term and long-term, tested in the superior range. Her executive function, her ability to make complex decisions, her understanding of financial matters, all of it is completely intact. David's lawyer tried to poke holes in the testimony during cross-examination, suggesting that perhaps I'd been having a good day, that the evaluation might not reflect my day-to-day functioning. But Dr. Williams held firm. The evaluation I performed takes multiple sessions over several weeks. It's specifically designed to identify patterns and rule out temporary fluctuations. Mrs. Thompson was consistently competent throughout the entire evaluation period. Dr. Sung testified next, then Dr. Barrett. 3 separate, independent medical professionals all saying the same thing. I was completely competent, showed no signs of cognitive decline, and was fully capable of managing my own affairs. But the real blow came when Richard started presenting our other evidence. Your Honor, I'd like to submit into evidence a series of recordings that demonstrate the true nature of the petitioner's concerns about Mrs. Thompson. He played the recording from the dinner party first. The courtroom was silent as my grandchildren's voices filled the space, mocking me, laughing about how easy it was going to be, discussing their plans for my assets once they had control. I watched their faces as they heard their own words played back. Jake going pale, Emma staring at her hands, Tyler looking like he might be sick. Then came the group chat messages, displayed on a screen for everyone to see. Message after message showing their deliberate campaign to gaslight me, their coordination in creating false evidence, their explicit discussions about the financial motivations behind the conservatorship petition. David and Carol looked stunned, like they couldn't believe this evidence existed. Like they'd somehow thought their planning sessions were private and protected. The judge's expression had changed from impassive to something harder, colder. She was reading the messages carefully, and with each one, her face got more set. Richard called Sarah Chun to the stand next, and she walked the court through her investigation. The pattern of visits designed to confuse me, the staged scenarios, the attempts to catch me making mistakes. The private investigator laid it all out methodically, professionally, and by the time she finished, there was no doubt about what had been happening. Finally, Richard called me to the stand. I walked up there on steady legs, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. And then I told my story, not with anger or bitterness, but with simple, honest clarity. I described discovering the group chat, the pain of realizing my own family saw me as an obstacle rather than a person. I explained how I'd hired Sarah, how I'd gotten the medical evaluations, how I documented everything because I knew no one would believe me otherwise. Mrs. Thompson, Richard asked gently, why do you believe your children and grandchildren filed this conservatorship petition? Because they want control of the estate my husband left me. They don't want to wait for me to die naturally to inherit. They want access to the assets now, and the only way to get that was to have me declared incompetent. And are you incompetent? No. I'm 76 years old and I'm in excellent health, mentally and physically. I manage my own finances, maintain my properties, volunteer regularly, and live independently. I don't need anyone to take care of me or make decisions for me. David's lawyer tried to shake my testimony during cross-examination, but there was nothing to shake. I answered every question calmly and clearly, demonstrating the very competence she was trying to disprove. When all the testimony was finished, when all the evidence had been presented, Judge Morrison called a brief recess. We sat there in that courtroom, me on one side and my family on the other, and no one spoke. The silence was heavy with everything that had been said, everything that had been exposed, everything that could never be taken back. When the judge returned, her face was stern. "I've heard enough," she said. "This is one of the most disturbing cases I've encountered in my 20 years on the bench. The petition for conservatorship is denied. Furthermore, I'm ordering an investigation into potential criminal charges for attempted fraud and elder abuse." She looked directly at David, Carol, and the grandchildren. "You should be ashamed of yourselves. Instead of cherishing your mother and grandmother, instead of allowing her to live out her years in dignity and peace, you conspired to strip her of her autonomy for financial gain. You gaslit her, you lied about her, you tried to use the legal system to commit what amounts to theft. Mrs. Thompson is clearly more than competent. She's shown more wisdom and foresight than any of you." The gavel came down and it was over. My family sat there in shock, their faces blank with disbelief. They'd been so certain they would win, so confident in their plan, and now it had all collapsed around them. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and walked out of that courtroom with my head held high. Behind me, I could hear Carol starting to cry, could hear someone saying they needed to talk to their lawyer. But I didn't look back. Outside, in the bright afternoon sunshine, Sarah put her hand on my shoulder. "You did it," she said quietly. "You stood up for yourself and you won." I had won. But standing there in that courthouse parking lot, I didn't feel victorious. I felt sad and old and more tired than I'd ever been in my life. I'd won the battle, yes. But the cost had been everything I'd spent 76 years building. My family, my role as mother and grandmother, the relationships I'd thought would sustain me through my final years. I'd won, but I'd lost too. And somehow, both things were true at the same time. The days after the hearing felt surreal, like I was living in someone else's life instead of my own. I'd go through the motions of my normal routine, making coffee in the morning, working in the garden, reading in the afternoon, but everything felt different now, colored by the knowledge of what had happened in that courtroom, by the finality of the judge's decision and the weight of what it meant for the future. The local newspaper ran a story about the case. Not with my name, thankfully. The reporter was kind enough to use initials only, but everyone in town knew who it was about anyway. Small towns are like that. News travels faster than light, and by the end of the week, everyone knew that Margaret Thompson's children had tried to have her declared incompetent to steal her money, and that she'd beaten them in court with recordings of their scheming. I saw people whispering when I went to the grocery store. Some of them looked at me with pity, others with a kind of horrified fascination. A few came up to tell me they were proud of me for standing up for myself, but even those conversations felt awkward and forced. What do you say to someone whose family betrayed them so publicly? How do you make small talk about the weather when everyone knows your children tried to steal your life from you? My friend Dorothy from the library was one of the few people who didn't treat me any differently. She came over 3 days after the hearing with a homemade lasagna and a bottle of wine, and we sat in my kitchen the way we had hundreds of times before. "How are you really doing?" she asked, not bothering with pleasantries or pretending everything was fine. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I won. I proved they were lying. I kept my independence. But Dorothy, I look at my phone and there are no messages from any of them. No calls. No attempts to apologize or explain. It's like I don't exist to them anymore." "Did they exist to you? Really?" Dorothy asked gently. "Before all this, before you found out what they were planning, were they really present in your life? Or were they just going through the motions, waiting for you to die?" It was a hard question, but a fair one. I thought about the visits before I discovered the truth, the phone calls that always seemed perfunctory, the way they'd look at their watches when they came over, eager to leave. Had any of it been real? Or had I been fooling myself all along, seeing love where there was only obligation and greed? I suppose they weren't, I admitted. I just didn't want to see it. Well, now you know the truth. And yes, the truth hurts like hell. But at least you're not living in a fantasy anymore, pretending people love you when they're really just waiting to rob you. She was right, of course. But knowing she was right didn't make it hurt less. About a week after the hearing, I got a call from Richard Morrison. The district attorney's office had reviewed the evidence and decided to press charges. David, Carol, Jake, Emma, and Tyler would all be facing criminal prosecution for attempted fraud and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. The trial was scheduled for 6 months out, and Richard warned me that I'd likely be called to testify again. How do you feel about that? He asked. Tired, I said. So tired of all of this. But if testifying means other families don't have to go through what I went through, then I'll do it. You're a strong woman, Margaret. Stronger than they ever gave you credit for. I didn't feel strong. I felt old and sad and hollowed out, like something essential had been scooped out of my center, and I was just going through the motions of living without really being alive. But life went on anyway, whether I felt ready for it or not. I started hearing things through the grapevine, bits and pieces of information about what was happening with my family in the aftermath of the hearing. David had been asked to take a leave of absence from his job, something about the negative publicity affecting the company's reputation. Carol's husband Tom had apparently moved out, though whether that was because of the case or problems that had existed before, I couldn't say. The grandchildren were faring even worse. Jake lost his sales job when his employer found out about the criminal charges. Emma's fiancé broke off their engagement. He'd apparently been horrified to learn what she'd been involved in. Tyler couldn't find work anywhere. Every time he applied for a job, a background check would turn up the pending charges and the story of what he'd done. I heard all this from Dorothy, who heard it from her daughter, who heard it from someone else. The gossip chain that had once embarrassed me now kept me informed about the consequences my family was facing for their choices. I wish I could say I felt satisfaction watching them suffer. That would be simpler, cleaner. But mostly I just felt sad. These were people I'd loved, people I'd helped raise, and now they were paying the price for their greed and cruelty. There was no joy in watching that, even knowing they deserved it. About a month after the hearing, I got a letter from Emma. Not a phone call, not a visit, just a letter, forwarded through Richard's office because she didn't dare contact me directly. I held that envelope for a long time before opening it, afraid of what I'd find inside. The letter was exactly what you'd expect. She was sorry, she said. She never meant to hurt me. She'd been influenced by Jake and Tyler, had gotten caught up in their scheme without really thinking about what she was doing. She was young and stupid, and she'd made a terrible mistake. Could I please forgive her? Could I maybe write a letter to the prosecutor asking them to drop the charges? She'd learned her lesson. She'd never do anything like this again. I read that letter 3 times, looking for any sign of genuine remorse, any acknowledgement of the depth of what she'd done. But all I found was self-pity and excuses. She wasn't sorry for betraying me. She was sorry she'd been caught. She wasn't asking for my forgiveness because she understood the pain she'd caused. She was asking because she wanted to escape the consequences of her actions. I wrote back, but not the letter she was hoping for. Dear Emma, I wrote, I received your letter. I understand you're facing difficult circumstances because of the choices you made. But forgiveness isn't something you can ask for like a favor and expect to receive because it's convenient for you. You participated in a conspiracy to steal my autonomy and my assets. You mocked me, gaslit me, and lied about me. You did these things deliberately and with full knowledge of what you were doing. The fact that you're facing consequences for those actions isn't my doing. It's yours. I hope you use this time to develop genuine empathy and understanding of how your actions affect others. But I can't help you avoid the natural results of what you did. That wouldn't be good for you or for me. I hope someday you understand why. Margaret. I sent the letter and felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not satisfaction. Just emptiness where love used to be. 2 months after the hearing, David showed up at my door. I saw him through the window walking up my front path, and my first instinct was to not answer, to pretend I wasn't home. But I'd spent too many years avoiding difficult things, pretending problems didn't exist. So I opened the door. He looked terrible. He'd lost weight, his face was drawn and tired, and there were new lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. For just a moment, I felt my maternal instinct kick in. Wanted to ask if he was okay, if he was eating enough, if he needed anything. Then I remembered what he'd done, what he'd tried to do, and I stayed silent. "Mom," he said, his voice rough. "Can we talk?" "There's nothing to talk about, David. Please, just give me 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, I let him in. We sat in the living room where he'd grown up, where I'd read him bedtime stories and bandaged his scraped knees and celebrated his accomplishments. The ghosts of who we used to be sat between us like uninvited guests. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know that doesn't mean much now, but I need to say it. I'm sorry for what we did, for what we tried to do. I got caught up in, I don't know, the money, the idea of financial security. I convinced myself we were doing the right thing, that you needed help, that we were protecting you. But I was lying to myself. We were protecting ourselves, our own financial interests. And I'm sorry." I listened to his apology and I waited to feel something. Waited for the anger to resurface, or for forgiveness to bloom, or for some kind of closure to settle over me. But I just felt tired. "Why are you really here, David?" I asked. "Is it because you're genuinely sorry for trying to steal my life from me? Or is it because you're facing criminal charges and you think if I forgive you, it'll make the prosecutor go easier on you?" He flinched. "Both, maybe. I'm sorry, Mom. But yes, I'm also scared. I could go to jail. My career is over. My marriage is falling apart. Everything I built is crumbling because of what I did, and I don't know how to fix it." "You can't fix it," I said quietly. "Some things, once broken, can't be repaired. You made choices, David. You chose money over your mother. You chose greed over integrity. You chose to try to steal from me rather than simply wait for me to die and inherit naturally. Those weren't mistakes or accidents. They were deliberate choices, made over months, planned carefully and executed methodically. And now you're living with the consequences of those choices. Are you going to testify against me?" he asked, and there it was, the real reason for his visit. Not to make amends, not to genuinely apologize, but to try to convince me to save him from himself. "Yes," I said. "I'm going to testify and tell the truth about what happened. What the prosecutor does with that testimony is up to them. But I won't lie to protect you, David. You didn't protect me when you had the chance. Why should I protect you now?" He stood up then, his face hardening. "So that's it? You're just going to throw your own son in jail?" "I'm not throwing you anywhere. You put yourself there when you decided to commit fraud. I'm just refusing to pull you back out. This is revenge," he said, his voice rising. "You're punishing us because we hurt your feelings." "No," I said, standing up to face him. "I'm holding you accountable because you committed crimes. There's a difference. If you'd simply been distant or neglectful, if you'd just been bad children, I would have been hurt, but I wouldn't have taken you to court. But you didn't just hurt my feelings, David. You tried to steal my freedom. You tried to have me declared incompetent so you could control every aspect of my life. You were willing to put me in a facility, to take away my home, my independence, my dignity, all for money. That's not just being a bad son. That's being a criminal." He left without another word, and I never saw him again. The criminal trial happened in the fall, 6 months after the conservatorship hearing. I testified for 3 hours, telling the jury everything that had happened, from discovering the group chat to overhearing their planning session to the months of gaslighting and manipulation. The defense attorneys tried to paint me as vindictive, as an angry mother punishing her children for normal family disagreements. But the evidence spoke for itself, the recordings, the messages, the documented conspiracy. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They found all 5 of them guilty on all counts. David and Carol each received 2 years in prison, suspended with 5 years probation and 500 hours of community service. The grandchildren, because they were younger and less central to the planning, got probation and community service along with hefty fines they'd be paying off for years. But more than the legal penalties, they lost their reputations. The story had spread beyond our small town. National news outlets picked it up as an example of elder abuse and financial exploitation. Their names and faces were everywhere, associated forever with what they'd tried to do. I watched the verdict being read from the back of the courtroom, and I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even sadness anymore. Just a kind of empty acceptance that this was how the story ended. My family had destroyed themselves through their own greed, and I'd simply refused to go down with them. After the trial, after all the publicity died down and the journalists stopped calling, I went home to my quiet house and I tried to figure out what came next. I'd won every battle, had proven myself right in every way that mattered legally. But I was 77 years old and I was alone, surrounded by the ghosts of a family that no longer existed, living in a house that had once been filled with love, but now just echoed with absence. Dorothy came by that evening, like she always did when she knew I needed company I wouldn't ask for. "So," she said, settling into the kitchen chair that had become hers over these difficult months, "you did it. You stood up to them, you won in court, you held them accountable. How does it feel?" "Empty," I admitted. "I thought winning would feel different. Better. But mostly I just feel alone." "You are alone," Dorothy said bluntly. "That's the price you paid for your freedom and dignity. But Margaret, you were alone before too. You just didn't know it. At least now you're alone with your self-respect intact." She was right. I'd lost my family, but I'd gained something too, the knowledge that I was strong enough to stand up for myself, that I valued my own dignity more than the illusion of family harmony, that I could face hard truths and make difficult choices and survive the consequences. It wasn't the ending I'd wanted, but it was the ending I'd earned, and there was a kind of peace in that. The first winter after the trial was the hardest. The holidays came and went without any of the traditions I'd maintained for 50 years. No family dinner at Thanksgiving, no Christmas morning with grandchildren opening presents under the tree, no New Year's Eve phone calls wishing each other well for the coming year. Just silence and empty rooms and the stark reality that this was my life now. I could have wallowed in it. Could have spent those long winter evenings feeling sorry for myself, mourning what I'd lost, dwelling on the injustice of it all. And I did for a while. I had days where I barely got out of bed, where the weight of loneliness felt too heavy to carry. Days where I'd set the table for two without thinking. Then remember Henry was gone and I was eating alone. Days where my phone would ring and my heart would leap with stupid hope before I remembered no one from my family would ever call again. But somewhere around February something shifted. Maybe it was the first crocuses pushing up through the snow in my garden. Brave little purple and white blooms that emerged despite the cold. Maybe it was Dorothy showing up one morning with coffee and pastries and refusing to let me mope another day. Maybe it was just time finally doing its slow work of healing, scabbing over wounds that would never fully heal but could at least become bearable. Whatever it was, I woke up one morning and decided I was tired of grieving for people who'd never really loved me the way I deserved to be loved. Tired of mourning a family that had existed more in my imagination than in reality. If I was going to be alone, I might as well be alone while actually living instead of just existing. I started small. I'd let the house go a bit during all the legal proceedings. Nothing terrible, but things that needed fixing, maintenance I'd been putting off. So I called contractors and had the upstairs bathroom renovated. Something Henry and I had talked about doing for years but never got around to. I had the exterior painted a soft yellow instead of the white it had been forever. I replaced the old living room furniture with pieces I actually liked instead of keeping Henry's mother's uncomfortable antique sofa, just because it was a family heirloom. Each change felt like reclaiming the space, making it mine instead of a museum to a life that no longer existed. The house started feeling different, lighter, brighter, more like a place I actually wanted to be instead of a prison of memories. I expanded my volunteer work at the library, going from 2 days a week to 4. The head librarian, Carol, asked if I'd be interested in starting a program for seniors who wanted to learn basic computer skills. And I said yes before I could overthink it. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, I'd teach a small group of people my age how to use email, how to video chat with distant family members, how to navigate the internet safely. Teaching those classes reminded me that I was still useful, still capable of learning new things and sharing knowledge with others. My students treated me with respect and genuine affection, grateful for my patience and my willingness to explain things multiple times without judgment. One woman, Helen, who was 82 and learning to use a computer for the first time so she could email her daughter in Australia, told me I'd changed her life. Something about that simple statement made me tear up. The idea that I could still change lives, still matter to people even without my family. I joined a book club that met every other Monday at the coffee shop downtown. 8 women ranging from their 60s to their 80s, All of us sharp and opinionated and unafraid to say what we really thought about the books we read. We talked about literature and life and politics and everything else, and no one treated me like I was fragile or broken. They knew about the trial, everyone in town did, but they didn't define me by it. I was just Margaret, another reader with opinions worth hearing. Through the book club, I met Susan, a widow about my age who'd lost her husband 5 years before, just like me. We started having coffee after the meetings, then lunch once a week, then became the kind of friends who could call each other at midnight when the loneliness got too heavy to bear alone. She understood what I'd been through in ways even Dorothy couldn't, because Susan had her own story of family betrayal, a son who'd stolen from her, a daughter who'd abandoned her after she refused to keep enabling her drug habit. The hardest part, Susan told me one afternoon over tea in her sunny kitchen, was accepting that the family I thought I had never really existed. I kept waiting for them to become the people I needed them to be, the people I'd convinced myself they were. But they were who they were, and that wasn't who I needed. Once I accepted that, once I stopped trying to force reality to match my fantasy, I could finally start building a life that actually worked. Her words resonated with me because that's exactly what I'd been doing. Mourning a fantasy, grieving for relationships that had never been real. My children and grandchildren had never loved me the way I'd loved them. They'd probably never even seen me as a full person, just as a source of comfort and eventually money. I'd been fooling myself for years, maybe decades, and the trial had just ripped away the illusion and forced me to see the truth. But the truth, as painful as it was, had also set me free. Free from the obligation to maintain relationships that drained me. Free from the guilt of never being enough for people who would never be satisfied. Free to actually build a life based on what I wanted instead of what I thought I owed to family members who'd never valued me anyway. Spring came early that year, and with it came an unexpected opportunity. The Elder Rights Foundation, the charity I'd left everything to in my will, reached out asking if I'd be willing to speak at their annual fundraising gala. They wanted me to share my story, to help raise awareness about elder abuse and financial exploitation. My first instinct was to say no. Speaking publicly about the most painful experience of my life, standing up in front of hundreds of strangers and admitting that my own family had tried to rob me, it sounded like torture. But Sarah Chan, who'd stayed in touch with me after the trial, called me personally to encourage me. "Margaret, you have no idea how many people are going through exactly what you went through," she said. "Most of them don't have the resources or the courage to fight back. Your story could help them understand they're not alone, that they have options, that standing up for yourself is possible even when it's terrifying." So I agreed, even though the idea made my stomach churn with anxiety. I worked with a speech coach for 3 weeks, practicing telling my story in a way that was honest but not bitter, that acknowledged the pain without wallowing in it, that focused on empowerment and hope instead of just trauma. The coach taught me breathing techniques for managing anxiety, helped me structure my talk so it had a clear arc from betrayal to survival to finding purpose again. The night of the gala, I stood backstage in a new dress Dorothy had helped me pick out. Emerald green, elegant and confident, nothing like the comfortable but frumpy clothes I used to hide in. My hands were shaking as I waited for my introduction, and I kept thinking about backing out, claiming I was sick, running away before I had to face all those people. But then I thought about Henry, about how proud he'd be that I was standing up not just for myself but for others facing similar abuse. I thought about the students in my computer class who looked at me with respect. I thought about Susan and Dorothy and all the other people who'd shown me that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who shows up for you when everything falls apart. The foundation director introduced me, and I walked out onto that stage with my head held high. The room was full, maybe 300 people, all dressed in formal attire, sitting at tables decorated with flowers and candles. For a moment, the sight of them all was overwhelming. But then I found Dorothy in the crowd, giving me a thumbs up, and I took a deep breath and began. I told them everything. About discovering the group chat, about the months of gaslighting and manipulation, about standing in that hallway hearing my grandchildren mock me, about hiring Sarah, getting the medical evaluations, gathering evidence, about the conservatorship hearing and the criminal trial, about the choice between fighting back and letting them win, and how fighting back had cost me my family but saved my dignity and freedom. "I won't lie to you," I said, my voice steady and clear in that huge room. Choosing to stand up for myself was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. I lost my children, my grandchildren, my entire family. There are days when that loss feels unbearable. Days when I wonder if maybe I should have just let them have what they wanted. If peace at any price might have been better than being right but alone. The room was completely silent, everyone listening intently. But then I remember what the alternative would have been. Living in a facility I didn't choose, having every aspect of my life controlled by people who saw me as an inconvenience, watching them spend the money my husband and I worked our whole lives to earn while I sat in a small room with nothing but regrets for company. That would have killed me faster than any disease. Killed not just my body but my spirit, my sense of self, everything that makes me who I am. I paused, looking out at all those faces. So yes, I'm alone now. But I'm alone on my own terms. I'm alone with my dignity intact, my independence preserved, my self-respect uncompromised. And I've learned something important. Being alone isn't the same as being lonely, and family isn't always the people you're related to. Family is the people who show up, who value you, who see you as a whole person instead of just what you can give them. The applause when I finished was thunderous, and several people were crying. Afterward, dozens of people came up to thank me, to share their own stories of family betrayal, to tell me I'd given them courage to set their own boundaries. An elderly man with tears in his eyes told me his daughter had been trying to get him declared incompetent for 2 years, and hearing my story made him realize he wasn't crazy for fighting back. That night, exhausted but somehow lighter than I'd felt in years, I realized something important. My family's betrayal had taken so much from me, but it had also given me something unexpected: purpose. A reason to use my experience to help others. A way to turn pain into something meaningful. Over the next few months, I became more involved with the Elder Rights Foundation. I started speaking at senior centers, at legal aid clinics, anywhere they'd have me. I helped train other seniors on how to recognize warning signs of financial exploitation, how to protect themselves legally, how to document evidence if they suspected abuse. I sat with other elderly people who were going through what I'd gone through, held their hands while they cried, assured them they weren't being paranoid or ungrateful, that trusting their instincts was okay. The work was hard, emotionally draining, sometimes triggering in ways that brought back all the pain of my own experience. But it was also healing. Every person I helped, every story I heard that ended with someone successfully protecting themselves, every thank you letter I received from someone who'd found courage through my story, all of it reminded me that my suffering hadn't been meaningless. It had taught me lessons I could share, given me empathy I could offer to others facing similar battles. I turned 78 that summer, and for the first time since Henry died, I actually celebrated. Dorothy and Susan threw me a party. Nothing fancy, just a backyard barbecue with people from the book club, my students from the computer classes, volunteers from the foundation, neighbors who'd supported me through everything. Maybe 30 people total, but every single one of them was there because they genuinely cared about me, not because they felt obligated or because they wanted something from me. As I looked around at all those faces, listening to their laughter and conversation, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Contentment. Not happiness exactly. I'm not sure I'll ever be truly happy again, not with the weight of everything that's happened, but contentment, a quiet satisfaction with the life I'd built from the ruins of my expectations. That evening, after everyone had gone home, and I was cleaning up paper plates and plastic cups from the backyard, I found myself thinking about David and Carol and the grandchildren, wondering where they were, how they were doing, if they ever thought about me with anything other than resentment. Wondering if Emma had found another fiancé, if Jake had found another job, if Tyler had finally gotten his life together. But the wondering wasn't painful anymore. It was just distant, like thinking about characters in a book I'd read long ago. People I used to know but who'd become strangers. They'd made their choices and I'd made mine, and we were all living with the consequences of those choices. I didn't wish them harm. I didn't wish them happiness either, to be honest. I just wished them nothing, felt nothing when I thought about them, and that absence of feeling was its own kind of peace. The life I'd built wasn't the life I'd imagined I'd have at 78. It was smaller, quieter, more solitary than I'd ever wanted, but it was mine. Built on truth instead of illusion, on genuine connection instead of obligatory relationships, on self-respect instead of desperate approval-seeking. And standing in my backyard that evening, surrounded by the remnants of a party thrown by people who actually cared about me, I realized something profound. I'd spent most of my life trying to be enough for people who would never be satisfied. Trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. Trying to create a family that existed in my dreams but not in reality. Now, finally, I was just being myself. And for the people in my life now, for Dorothy and Susan and all the others who'd chosen to stand beside me, that was enough. I was enough. Just as I was, without having to prove anything or earn anyone's love or pretend to be someone I wasn't. That realization, standing there in the twilight with fireflies starting to blink in the garden Henry had planted so many years ago, felt like coming home to myself after a very long journey away. I'm 80 years old now, and I'm sitting in the sunroom Henry added to the house 30 years ago, looking out at the garden that's bloomed and faded and bloomed again through 3 seasons since the trial ended. The roses he planted are still thriving. Testament to how strong roots can outlast even the hardest winters. There's a kind of poetry in that, I think, how the things we plant with love and care can survive long after we're gone, while the things we force or manipulate wither and die no matter how much we try to control them. It's been almost 3 years since that day in the courtroom when Judge Morrison denied the conservatorship petition and my family's plan collapsed around them. 3 years since I've spoken to any of them, since I've heard their voices or seen their faces except in the occasional nightmare that still visits me sometimes. 3 years of building a life I never expected to have, never even knew I wanted, but that fits me better than the one I spent 77 years trying to force into a shape that never quite worked. I wish I could tell you that time healed everything, that the pain completely disappeared and I woke up one day feeling nothing but gratitude for how things turned out. But that would be a lie, and I've spent too many years living with lies to want to perpetuate anymore. The truth is more complicated than that, the way truth usually is. There are still hard days. Days when I see a grandmother with her grandchildren in the grocery store and feel a sharp stab of loss for what I'll never have. Days when holidays roll around and the house feels too quiet, too empty, too full of echoes from celebrations that will never happen again. Days when I wonder if maybe I was too harsh, too unforgiving, if maybe I should have found a way to bridge the gap and rebuild some kind of relationship with David or Carol or even one of the grandchildren. But then I remember standing in that hallway listening to them mock me, laugh about how easy it was going to be to take everything from me. I remember the group chat messages, the casual cruelty of their words, the way they discuss my future as if I were already dead or might as well be. I remember Emma's letter asking for forgiveness not because she understood what she'd done, but because she wanted to escape consequences. I remember David showing up at my door looking for absolution he hadn't earned, seeking my help in avoiding the punishment he deserved. And I remember that the family I'm mourning never really existed except in my imagination. The people I thought they were, loving children and devoted grandchildren who valued me for who I was, those people were fantasies I'd created to avoid seeing the truth. The real David and Carol and Jake and Emma and Tyler, they'd show me who they were through their actions. I just hadn't wanted to believe it until I couldn't avoid it anymore. So no, the pain hasn't completely disappeared. But it's changed. It's not the raw, bleeding wound it was in those first months after the trial. It's more like an old scar now, still visible, still tender if you press on it, but healed enough that I can live with it without it consuming my entire existence. Last month I got a letter from Carol, not forwarded through a lawyer this time, just sent directly to my house, which meant she'd overcome whatever pride or shame had kept her from contacting me for 3 years. I held that envelope for a long time before opening it, my hands shaking slightly, my heart beating faster than it should. Part of me didn't want to read it, didn't want to risk reopening wounds that had finally started to close. But another part of me, the part that had loved her before everything fell apart, needed to know what she had to say. The letter was different from Emma's had been. No excuses, no blame shifting, no requests for me to make things easier for her. Just a simple, heartbreaking acknowledgement of what she'd done and the cost of her choices. She wrote that she thought about me every day, wondered how I was doing, wished things had been different. She wrote that she'd been in therapy for 2 years, working through her issues with money and entitlement, and the way she'd learned to value possessions over people. She wrote that she understood now why I'd done what I did. Why I couldn't just forgive and forget. Why some betrayals are too deep to bridge with simple apologies. She didn't ask for forgiveness. Didn't ask to see me or talk to me or rebuild our relationship. She just wanted me to know that she'd become aware of what she'd done, truly aware in a way she hadn't been during the trial or in the years before it. She wanted me to know that she was sorry, genuinely sorry, Not because she wanted something from me, but because the weight of her guilt had become too heavy to carry without at least trying to acknowledge it. The letter ended with a single line that made me cry for the first time in months. You deserved better than the daughter I was. I hope you found people who give you the love I failed to provide. I read that letter 3 times, sitting in this sunroom with tears running down my face, and I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly. I'm not sure I'll ever fully forgive what they did, and I don't think I should have to. But maybe something adjacent to forgiveness. Acceptance, perhaps. An acknowledgement that people are complicated, that someone can do terrible things and still eventually recognize the harm they've caused, even if that recognition comes too late to fix what they've broken. I wrote back. Not a long letter, not an invitation to reconcile, but a brief acknowledgement of her words. I told her I appreciated her honesty, that I was glad she was getting help, that I hoped she'd learned lessons that would make her a better person going forward. I told her I'd built a good life for myself, surrounded by people who valued me, and that while I couldn't offer her a place in that life, I didn't wish her harm. I told her I hoped she found peace with what she'd done, the same way I'd found peace with my choice to protect myself from her. It was a strange kind of closure, not the Hollywood ending where everyone hugs and cries and promises to do better. Just 2 people acknowledging hard truths and then going their separate ways with maybe a little less anger and a little more understanding than they'd had before. David never wrote. Neither did any of the grandchildren. I don't expect they ever will. And that's okay. Some relationships, once broken in certain ways, can never be repaired, and trying to force them back together just creates more damage. Better to accept the loss and move forward than to keep reopening wounds that need to heal. My work with the Elder Rights Foundation has become the center of my life in ways I never anticipated. I speak regularly now, traveling to different cities to share my story and help train professionals who work with elderly clients. I've testified before state legislators about strengthening laws against elder abuse. I've been interviewed for documentaries and news programs about financial exploitation of seniors. I've helped dozens of other people navigate similar situations with their own families, offering guidance based on what I learned through my own painful experience. The foundation asked me last year to join their board of directors, and I said yes. At board meetings, I sit alongside lawyers and social workers and other advocates, and I'm treated as an equal, my insights valued, my voice heard. There's something deeply satisfying about being in a room where people listen to you because they respect your wisdom and experience, not because they want something from you or feel obligated to pretend to care. Dorothy is still my closest friend, coming by for coffee at least twice a week, calling when she knows I might be having a hard day, never letting me isolate for too long. Susan and I still have our weekly lunches, trading stories about our complicated relationships with our families, our struggles with aging, our determination to live fully despite the loneliness that sometimes threatens to overwhelm us. The book club still meets every other Monday, and I've read more great literature in the past 3 years than I read in the previous 30, my mind engaged and challenged in ways that keep me sharp and curious. I've started writing too, something I never did before. Not a memoir exactly, though elements of my story thread through it. More like a guide for other seniors facing similar situations, how to recognize warning signs of financial exploitation, how to protect yourself legally, how to gather evidence, how to find the courage to fight back, even when it means losing people you love. The foundation is going to publish it as a resource manual, distribute it to senior centers and legal aid offices across the country. The idea that my painful experience might help thousands of other people avoid or escape similar abuse gives me more satisfaction than I can easily express. My health is good, surprisingly good for 80. My doctor says I have the cardiovascular system of someone 20 years younger, probably because I've always stayed active and now I don't have the stress of maintaining toxic relationships. My mind is sharper even than it was 3 years ago, probably because I'm using it more teaching, speaking, writing, reading, engaging with the world instead of just existing in it. I take my medications reliably, manage my finances carefully, maintain my home properly, and do all the things my family claimed I couldn't do when they were trying to have me declared incompetent. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about what my life would look like if I'd made different choices. If I'd never discovered the group chat, never hired Sarah, never fought back. I'd probably be in a facility somewhere, maybe one of the nicer ones but still a facility, living a half-life while my children spent the money Henry and I earned. I'd be medicated and managed and slowly dying inside while everyone pretended it was for my own good. Or maybe I'd have discovered their plan but chosen not to fight it, let them have what they wanted in exchange for keeping some semblance of family connection. Signed over power of attorney, moved wherever they wanted me to move, accepted my diminished role as the incompetent old lady who needed to be taken care of. Swallowed my pride and my self-respect in exchange for phone calls on holidays and occasional visits where everyone pretended the betrayal had never happened. Both of those alternatives make me feel physically ill. Because yes, I'm alone now. Yes, I lost my family. Yes, there are hard days and lonely nights and moments when the weight of that loss feels crushing. But I'm free. I'm myself. I'm living on my own terms, making my own choices, surrounded by people who see me as a whole person instead of an obstacle or a burden or an asset to be managed. And that freedom, that autonomy, that self-respect, it was worth the price I paid. I know that now with a certainty that's settled into my bones, become part of who I am at the deepest level. This morning, I got a call from a woman named Patricia, referred to me by Sarah Chan. Patricia is 74, and her son and daughter-in-law have been pressuring her to sign over power of attorney, telling her she's too confused to manage her own affairs, creating situations designed to make her doubt herself. She called Sarah in tears, not sure if she was being paranoid or if her instincts were right, afraid of losing her family but more afraid of losing herself. I talked to Patricia for over an hour, shared my story, listened to hers, validated her concerns and helped her see that what she was experiencing had a name, elderabuse, and that she had options beyond simply accepting it or staying silent. By the end of our conversation, she was calmer, clearer, ready to take the first steps to protect herself. She thanked me multiple times, said I'd given her hope, said knowing someone else had been through this and survived made her feel less alone and less crazy. After we hung up, I sat here in this sunroom for a long time, watching the afternoon light filter through the trees in the garden, and I felt something I can only describe as profound gratitude. Not gratitude for what my family did to me. I wouldn't wish that pain on anyone, but gratitude for what I'd managed to do with that pain, how I transformed it into purpose and meaning, and a way to help others. My life now isn't the life I planned. It's not the life I would have chosen if someone had given me alternatives. But it's a good life, an authentic life, a life built on truth and dignity and genuine connection. It's a life where I matter, where my voice counts, where people value me for who I am rather than what I can give them. I'm 80 years old and I'm alone and I'm okay. More than okay, actually. I'm at peace in a way I never was during all those years when I had a family and name but not in reality, when I was surrounded by people but still fundamentally isolated because none of them really saw me. If you're reading this, if you're listening to my story, and you're facing something similar, family members who see you as an inconvenience, children who value your assets more than your personhood, a slow erosion of your autonomy disguised as concern for your well-being, I want you to know something important. It's not too late. It's never too late to stand up for yourself, to protect your dignity, to choose freedom over false peace. Yes, there will be consequences. Yes, you might lose people you love. Yes, the road ahead will be harder than the road of least resistance, the path of just giving in and letting them have what they want. But you will survive. You will build a new life from the ashes of the old one. You will discover strength you didn't know you had and create connections you never imagined were possible. You will learn that being alone isn't the worst thing that can happen to you. Losing yourself is worse. Being controlled and diminished and treated as less than human by people who claim to love you is worse. And someday, maybe years from now, you'll sit in a sunroom or a garden or wherever your peace is found, and you'll look back on the choice you made to stand up for yourself, and you'll know it was right. You'll know it was worth it. You'll know that the price you paid, as steep as it was, bought you something more valuable than the approval of people who didn't deserve you anyway. It bought you yourself, your dignity, your freedom, your authentic life. And that, I've learned, is worth everything. The sun is setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that Henry would have loved. I'm going to make myself dinner, nothing fancy, just soup and bread. But I'll eat it at the table with a cloth napkin and good dishes because I deserve that small ceremony, that small acknowledgement that my life matters even if I'm the only one bearing witness to it. Tomorrow, I'll call Patricia back to check on her. Make sure she's taking the steps she needs to take to protect herself. I'll go to my computer class at the library, where my students will tell me about their week and show me photos of their grandchildren and treat me with the respect my own family never gave me. I'll have coffee with Dorothy, who'll make me laugh and remind me that growing old doesn't mean giving up or giving in. And I'll keep living this life I've built, this unexpected, hard-won, authentic life. I'll keep speaking and teaching and writing and helping others find their way through the darkness I once navigated. I'll keep waking up each morning grateful for my freedom and my clarity and my peace. Because I'm Margaret Thompson, I'm 80 years old and I survived. Not just the betrayal, not just the trial, not just the loss of everyone I thought would be there for me in my final years. I survived the hardest thing of all, losing my illusions and learning to live with the truth. And on the other side of that survival, I found something I've been searching for my whole life without knowing it. I found myself. The real me, not the version I thought I needed to be to earn love or keep peace or maintain family harmony. Just Margaret, flawed and strong and resilient and free. And that's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything.